Ever get that feeling? Like you're
Yeah.
just kind of enduring a huge chunk of your life, just waiting for the good parts to come along.
Yeah, I know that feeling. It's pretty common, I think, especially these days when everyone's so busy all the time.
It's exactly what made me think of this article by Balazs Vendler. He's an entrepreneur, founded Games for Business.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and he posted it on his website, vendler.hu, back on July 16th, 2024. And it really got me thinking about the 80-20 rule.
You mean like 80% of your results come from 20% of your effort?
Exactly. But Vendler's kind of challenging that. Like, is it really an excuse to just settle? Settle for a life where we're basically just enduring 80% of the time.
I see. Yeah. I mean, the 80-20 rule, or the Pareto Principle, as it's sometimes called, can be a really useful concept, especially in business when you need to figure out where to focus your energy to get the best results. But Vendler's point is, should it really be dictating how much we enjoy our lives?
Right. Like, is it really a life sentence?
Yeah.
80% enduring just to get that little 20% of enjoyment.
And to be fair to Pareto, he wasn't even talking about effort and results initially. His observation was about land ownership in Italy back in the 1800s. 80% of the land owned by just 20% of the people. It wasn't until later that it got applied to things like business and productivity.
Huh. That's a good point. But anyway, Vendler goes on to talk about his own experience, juggling all these different roles in the early years of his company.
Oh, I bet.
Finances, sales, marketing, client management, all of it. He was doing everything.
Yeah.
And he says it forced him to make some tough choices. He talks about having some skeletons in the closet.
Makes sense. I think a lot of entrepreneurs can relate to that feeling of being totally overwhelmed,
Like,
wearing too many hats. Right. And it's not just entrepreneurs, it's anyone who's ever felt stretched thin,
yeah,
having to prioritize, letting some things slide.
for sure. And that's what I think is so interesting about Vendler's take on this, because he's basically saying, wait a minute, is that really inevitable? This 80-20 split. Like, is it just something we have to accept?
And he really pushes back against that idea, right? Like he refuses to believe that 80% of life just has to be a struggle.
Exactly. And so then the question becomes, what if we could flip the script? What if we could aim for 80-20 in favor of the good stuff? Is that even possible? Or is it just wishful thinking?
It's a big question for sure.
Yeah, it is. And Vellner uses this really interesting analogy to kind of illustrate his point. It's about software development.
Okay.
He says, getting a product to like 80% good, that's relatively easy. 90%, that gets a lot tougher. But then to push beyond that, to get it to like 99, 100%, that takes exponentially more effort for what are ultimately diminishing returns.
I see where he's going with that. It makes you wonder if we're always striving for 100% perfection in every area of our lives, even when the effort it takes far outweighs any real benefit we get from it.
Right. And maybe the key isn't perfection at all. Maybe it's about finding that sweet spot where the effort you put in matches the enjoyment you get out of it. And maybe, just maybe, accepting good enough in some areas can actually be really fulfilling.
It's a different way of thinking about it, for sure.
And that's where Vendler makes this really important point. He says this whole idea of the ideal ratio, it's personal.
Yeah.
It's not about some universal number. It's about finding a balance that genuinely feels good to you. So it's almost like instead of work-life balance, he's suggesting good life balance.
Yeah.
Right? Like intentionally designing more of that good stuff
Yeah.
into our lives rather than just trying to squeeze it in around work.
Yeah. I like that good life balance. And that brings up another question, right? What is the good stuff? I mean, it's different for everyone, isn't it?
Totally. And it's easy to get caught up in what everyone else is doing.
Yeah.
What we see on social media, what society tells us we should be doing. We end up chasing someone else's definition of a good life.
Oh, absolutely. It's like we're all following the script that someone else wrote.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how do we break free from that? How do we figure out what actually lights us up?
Well, Vendler suggests a really simple exercise, and it's powerful too. He says, imagine your ideal day. What are you doing? Who are you with? Where are you?
Oh, okay. I like this. It's getting practical now.
Yeah, less philosophy, more action plan. So let yourself go. Really picture it. What does your perfect day look like?
All right, let's see. Okay, so I'm waking up in a cozy cabin by a lake. No alarm clock, obviously. The morning is for writing, maybe a long hike in the woods with my dog. Then in the afternoon, I'm doing something creative. Painting, maybe, or playing music. And then in the evening, a delicious meal, good conversation with people I love, and then stargazing by a bonfire.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah.
So peaceful. And how does that compare to your average day right now? What are the biggest differences? Where are those gaps?
Well, okay, reality check. Most days I'm in front of a computer, emails, deadlines, all that. Definitely not enough time for creative stuff or being in nature. And evenings.
Yeah.
More like collapsing on the couch than having deep conversations and stargazing.
Right. So that gap between the ideal and the reality, that's where the work begins. But the good news is, you don't have to do it all at once. It's about making small changes, intentional changes, shifting things gradually towards that 80-20 you're aiming for.
Okay, that makes sense. But if I'm stuck in that 80%, that enduring zone, where do I even begin?
Vendler's advice. Start with one tiny tweak. Just one small thing you can do differently tomorrow to bring a little piece of that ideal day into your real life.
Okay. Well, maybe instead of scrolling through social media every night, I could spend 30 minutes reading a book that really inspires me. Or instead of hitting snooze and rushing through my morning, I could wake up 15 minutes earlier and do some stretches while listening to nature sounds.
Love those. And see, even those little shifts can have a ripple effect. Reading an inspiring book might spark ideas for a creative project. Starting your day with mindful movement, that could set a calmer tone for the whole day.
Right. It's like compound interest for your happiness. Little by little, it all adds up.
Exactly. And that's why consistency is so important. Don't beat yourself up if you slip up sometimes or if things feel slow. Even if you only shift that ratio by a percentage point or two each month, think about where you'll be a year from now.
Wow. Yeah, that's encouraging. It feels so much less overwhelming than thinking I have to overhaul my entire life all at once.
And that's the beauty of Vendler's approach, right? It's about making conscious choices, step by step, creating a life that's truly aligned with what matters most to you.
So it's not about accepting the 80-20 rule as some kind of unchangeable law. It's about saying, hey, wait a minute. I can actually design a life where I enjoy way more than just 20% of it.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming that power and
Mhm.
creating a life that's genuinely good, not just good enough.
Yeah, it is empowering, right?
Yeah.
Like we actually have a choice. We don't just have to accept things the way they are. We can actually shape our lives.
And it's interesting because Venla brings up another point here. He talks about how culturally we often kind of reinforce this idea that life is supposed to be hard, like suffering is somehow noble.
It's true, isn't it? Like there's this whole narrative that if you're not struggling, you're not really living a meaningful life.
Exactly. But Venler, he really challenges that. I love this quote from him. He says, I don't want to spend my life struggling just so things can be good in heaven. Like, why wait for joy? Why not try to make most of our lives here something we actually look forward to?
Right. It's like, why postpone happiness? I think a lot of us buy into this story that we have to earn it,
Hmm.
through hard work and sacrifice.
Right.
But what if we don't?
And to be clear, he's not saying we should all become hedonists and just avoid responsibility.
Right.
It's about finding that balance, taking care of our obligations, but also making our own well-being a priority, making time for the things that bring us joy.
So it's not about ignoring the tough stuff. It's
Yeah.
about choosing to focus more on the good stuff.
Exactly. And he actually argues that this shift in mindset can make us more effective in all areas of our lives. Because when we feel energized, when we feel fulfilled, we show up as better versions of ourselves in our work, our relationships, everything.
It's like they say, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Right. If we're constantly draining ourselves, we have nothing left to give.
Exactly. So Vendler's really inviting us to question this whole 80-20 thing, right? To see if we can create a life where we're not just enduring, but actually thriving.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this question. What's your life ratio right now? Is it a balance that feels good to you? Or are you spending too much time just getting by?
And if you're not quite where you want to be, what's one small thing you can do, even today, to start shifting that ratio, even just a little bit?
Remember, it's not about overnight transformations. It's about those consistent actions, the small steps that create a ripple effect over time.
So go out there, start designing a life you love, a life filled with more joy, more purpose, more fulfillment, because you deserve to thrive, not just endure.